the next few hours, all eyes will be on the big bilateral, which is going to happen on the sidelines of G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi's invitation to the G7 is being seen as a huge diplomatic overture by the new Canadian leadership to reset ties based on mutual trust and sensitivity. Remember, this is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Canada in a decade. Prime Minister Modi's visit comes amidst signs of a thaw in India-Canada relations, which had hit rock bottom during the tenure of this man, Justin Trudeau, the former Canadian Prime Minister. And tensions had flared up sharply after Trudeau in September 2023, after Trudeau, in fact, alleging that there was an involvement of the Indians in the killing of pro-Khalistani separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia, which was an accusation which was strongly denied by New Delhi. The diplomatic fallout saw India and Canada expel senior diplomats, suspend formal contacts. India had also accused the Trudeau government of allowing pro-Khalistani elements to operate freely on the Canadian soil. Then what happened? Indian envoy to Canada, Sanjay Kumar Verma, who was withdrawn by New Delhi later, was accused by Ottawa of having links to Nijjar murder in June 2023. India, though at that time, had consistently rejected any links to the killing of Nijjar, a designated terrorist, by the NIA, which is the National Investigation Agency, and had in fact accused Trudeau government and Trudeau administration that they were pandering to Khalistani sympathizers for political gains. However, what happened in March? Let me ask, just look at these graphics right here. In March, when Carney, who is an economist and a political newcomer, assumed office, both sides indicated a willingness to move forward. Remember, India and Canada share deep economic and people-to-people ties. If we look at the bilateral trade in goods in 2024, it stood at $8.6 billion. Canada, remember, is home to one of the largest Indian diaspora globally, with over 1.8 million Canadians of Indian origin and another 1 million NRIs living in Canada. They are students, workers, and also in the service sector. While Indian students have historically formed the largest group of international students in Canada, which comprises of roughly around 41%, that was in 2022. But after the immigration curbs, of course, that has been impacted. Let's bring in the guests who are joining us on the show tonight. We have Michael Kugelman, who is the Senior Fellow of Asia Pacific Foundation. He's joining me from Washington, D.C. We have Brahma Chilani, Strategic Affairs Expert. Michael, Prime Minister Modi is in Canada, and of course, there's a lot of anticipation and expectations from this visit. The big focus, of course, would be about efforts to reset ties and how future will be totally dependent on how Ottawa actually responds to New Delhi's core concern. And the New Delhi core concern has been with regards to them almost giving shelter to Khalistani elements. Do you think Carney will be able to tread this path very, very carefully? And will actually able to tread this path?
Carney has been saying all the right things, and the messaging and the tone is very much in contrast to what we heard from the previous Canadian government. And I do think that once you had a new government in place in Canada, it set in motion the possibilities for a reset in ties between India and Canada. So far, so good. And indeed, there have been some reports that Canada and India have even agreed to start sharing intelligence when it comes to tracking down transnational criminals, extremists, and terrorists. I don't think that's yet been confirmed by India or Canada, but there's been some reporting on this in recent days. So, and I should also say that the Canadian government has indicated its desire to work more closely with India on law enforcement issues. So this all suggests a willingness on the part of the new government in Canada to partner with India on these sensitive issues that really was not an option. It was not a possibility for cooperation during the previous Canadian government. So those are all good signs, but certainly a long way to go.
All right, Dr. Brahmachelani, you are also of the opinion that it's a long way to go, or will we be seeing some signs emerge today?
Maria, the G7 summit marks an international coming out party for Prime Minister Carney, who won the Canadian election in April. It was he, as you mentioned, who invited Modi. It was the overture. The overture came from Carney. And of course, Modi was happy to accept the invitation to the G7 summit. But the reason why Carney invited Modi was largely because the Canadian economy is stagnating and Canada's relations with both China and India are quite strained. And Carney has decided that he wants to reset relations with these two important giants, India and China. A day before he invited Modi, Carney agreed to high-level talks with China to reset the relationship and to try and reach a trade agreement. So his motive is largely economics. He wants to revive the Canadian economy. He looks at the Indian market as a big market, and that's the main reason why he's seeking to improve relations with India. But India's concerns are actually largely in the political sphere because Canada, for a long period of time, under successive governments since the 1980s, has provided political space to the Khalistanis. It began in the first half of the 1980s when Canada became a haven for Khalistan terrorists, leading eventually to the 1985 twin Air India bombings. Yet, India left Canada off the hook after those twin bombings. In fact, it took Canada 21 years to set up a commission of inquiry into the main bombing, the Air India Flight 181 bombing. And now, in a way, history has repeated itself. Canada has become the global hub of the Khalistan movement. So the real issue for India is, will Canada now begin to rein in these Khalistan militants who are using Canadian soil to make terrorist threats against India? The political space that Canada has provided to these militants is the main Indian concern. And Carney's real test will be whether he will seek to address that core concern of India.
Okay, Michael, these two countries, as you were saying, are working out a new arrangement, perhaps. And this is for law enforcement agencies to share intel on syndicates and terrorism. India has also suggested that Canadian government should check the antecedents of people entering their country illegally and then they later seek asylum. One might say that given the number of Indian origin people living in Canada, that's a huge population, which is roughly around 30 lakh people. Do you think that's a tall ask? And how influential, because this is a very, very influential group that we are looking at, also in Canadian politics, they have stake in it. How will that actually play out then?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is all a very sensitive and complex issue, and it's going to take a very long time for Canada to work through it. But again, I mean, the fact that it's signaled that it's willing to start undertaking these steps, I mean, that's a big change from what we saw with the previous Canadian government. And I think that could only benefit, or theoretically, that can only benefit ties with India.
So, will you then say that the two sides will be looking at more points of convergence, like trade, climate change, people-to-people connect, rather than looking at the pain points, which got, of course, aggravated during Justin Trudeau's tenure? Because if you look at the economic front, the Canadian Pension Fund, because there were reports suggesting will continue, they continue to be very, very bullish on India, and they have invested over $75 billion, and the trade talks are, in fact, poised to go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, assuming we have a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Carney, it would be relatively short. Given that it would be on the sidelines of the G7 summit, so there would not be a comprehensive agenda, which suggests that the two leaders would say a few things about a number of issues. That would certainly include, the issues that are easier to talk about. And you hit on trade. Absolutely. I think that's something that they would want to hit on. I mean, it's quite notable that despite how bad tensions have been over the last few years, if you look at trade volume, it's been fairly consistent and fairly stable. It has not taken that many hits. And so I think that could be something that they would want to talk about. If you look at something like energy trade and clean energy investment, Canada is one of the largest investors in renewables. I think it's a top 10 investor in renewables. And clearly, there are very significant and attractive clean energy markets in India. And so I think there could be a sweet spot potentially for India and Canada. And if they're able to pursue those issues, if they're able to pursue that type of cooperation, that could clearly bolster the relationship on the whole, make it easier for the two sides to sit down and talk about the more delicate issues, the law enforcement issue, the Khalistan issue, at the end of the day. So I expect that they will, when the two leaders meet, they will indeed focus on the law enforcement issue, but I don't think that will dominate the discussion. They likely will want the tone to remain positive so that they can cover a number of issues in the brief time that the two leaders have together.
Brahmachalani, so far, the new Canadian administration, the new leadership in Ottawa have struck all the right notes when it comes to sending a message or signaling India. What do you think will be the big takeaway of the bilateral meeting, which is going to happen a few hours from now?
The thing is that we tend to focus too much on the optics, not on the outcomes. For example, the emphasis in India is always on the symmetry, the handshakes, the meetings, not on the outcomes. We should not forget that Prime Minister Carney invited Modi virtually at the 11th hour, right? It was a difficult decision for him, for which he has faced a lot of criticism at home. But he did invite Modi at the last minute. And the fact that he failed to get a trade deal with Trump, the expectation was in Canada that the Trump-Carney meeting yesterday would produce at least some tangible movement toward a bilateral trade deal, because Trump has really targeted Canada in his trade war, which has made Carney's task much more difficult. And that's the main reason why Carney is seeking to improve relations with India and China. But the fact is that these are two major democracies, India and Canada, and traditionally they've had a friendly relationship. So if they can use cooperative diplomacy to address each other's concerns, this relationship could be revived. Therefore, we will have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see as to what emerges from this first effort at improving relations, because much more would need to be done to restore the relationship and to also to allow the two countries to station diplomats in each other's capitals, because right now the two high commissions, the Canadian High Commission in New Delhi and the Indian High Commission in Ottawa, are operating at bare minimal levels. So restoring diplomatic representation at the previous levels is also very important, because you can't have a cooperative relationship when the two diplomatic missions, the embassies, are operating at bare minimal levels. So it will be a process, but I think this first meeting is important in setting the direction.
All right, Brahmachalani and Michael Kugelman, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.